Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I have a chance to talk to you about an applied information economics approach to assessing resilience in the Horn of Africa. And one of my objectives is that by the end of this presentation, you have a better idea of what that means than you do now. So we, in the CG, we strive to do research for impact. That's our mission. And we've quickly realized that research for development only really have impacts when we affect decisions. So when we influence the way decisions are made in development. And the question now is, how can we, in supporting these decisions, how can we effectively consider resilience? That's essentially what I want to talk about today. And there are certain challenges, of course, in trying to do this. And mainly, one of the main ones is that there's all kinds of different definitions of resilience, but one thing they all have in common is that they're all fairly complex, and it's also resilience is dynamically defined as the response to shocks and stresses. And that's, of course, something that's incredibly difficult to observe in the field. So we're grappling for all kinds of indicators, but the real phenomenon is actually very difficult to observe. Most models that exist are incredibly data demanding and therefore also error prone, because the more data we need, the bigger the errors get in the end. And in most places where resilience is really most important, we don't actually have data. Data is incredibly scarce, and that makes it very difficult to work with this topic. So that's why it's been extremely difficult to operationalize this concept, and I think that's why we have a big conference on the topic today. Now, there are certain opportunities when we actually focus on decisions rather than in trying to measure resilience as such, because I mean, of course, if resilience matters, and I think we're all convinced that it matters, it should have measurable outcomes. There should be something we are able to observe if a system is resilient compared to one that's not resilient. And if we have several systems to choose from, different alternative realities, as we normally have when we make a decision, it's sometimes enough to figure out which one is the more resilient alternative. And that one should be the one that does best in the long run, most of the time when it's exposed to shocks and stresses. So there's a bit of a probabilistic element in this, which we can try to address through modeling rather than through observations. So we have to find out which one is actually, if we have a decision, basically we have a crossroads in development, and we have to find out which one is the more resilient system. And of course we have to find this out quickly, cheaply, with imperfect information, very scarce data, and yet extremely accurately to meet the demands of the decision makers. Yeah, so this sounds like a fairly tall order, and with, I guess, traditional scientific techniques, it's very difficult to do. So I want to discuss a slightly different approach to the topic, which is called applied information economics, and that's not so much a scientific tool as rather a tool that's well established in business analysis. So this really comes from the business world, and we only have a few minutes, so a very, very brief overview. Basically, this starts with participatory development of a business model for a particular decision between analysts or scientists and ideally the decision makers themselves or people that are close to them. And this business model is supposed to contain all relevant costs, all benefits, and all risks, all possible shocks and all stresses. They all have to be in here, regardless of whether or not we can measure them. At this point, that's not very important, because then in the next stage, we get the decision makers or their advisors to tell us what the current range of uncertainty is. Because for every piece of data that we could possibly have, we almost never know absolutely nothing. We can, in almost all cases, we can come up with a confidence interval. We know whatever that adoption rates of a certain dimension will be between X and Y. We can't say that it's exactly here, but we know that's between this. And so in this stage, we define probability distributions for everything, for every uncertain variable, regardless of how uncertain it is. And that then enables us to run simulations. So then we run simulations, we get an idea, we get a distribution of potential outcomes for each alternative decision, for each decision alternative, and that considers all the relevant risks. So that then is also a way to identify the uncertainties that we really have to address, things that really constrain our ability to make a good decision. Because most of the time when we ask scientists what is the main uncertainty, they're going to tell us exactly their field of expertise, which is not always objectively the knowledge gap that matters most. But this analysis can actually tell us what we need to know in order to find out which decision alternative is preferable. We can then take measurements where the value is really high, run the simulation again, and hopefully by the time that we've actually reduced our big uncertainties, we're able to make a recommendation of what the best course of action is. And we can also give a plausible distribution of the net benefits of taking a particular course of action. We won't be able to say exactly this is the benefit, but we can give a probability distribution. That's, in a way, the more honest way to address the topic. Bit abstract maybe, but let me give you three quick examples from Kenya. One refers to a water pipeline that is in the works. One is on borehole management, and one is on rain-fed agriculture interventions. So the first one refers to the town of Wajir in northern Kenya, which currently has basically no clean water supply and no sanitation system, which is a problem because the city is rapidly growing. And a pipeline is currently planned that's supposed to conduct water over about 100 kilometers to this town from a different location. And this taps a politically sensitive aquifer. In northern Kenya, you don't easily take water away from someone without resistance. So currently, it's a very emotionally loaded situation, and help is needed to decide whether or not this is a good idea. So we had intensive discussions with stakeholders on this topic, and ultimately convened a group from among these stakeholders to build a model together with them. And we were able then to simulate the likely outcomes of this intervention. And what you see here, I think everyone can sort of see it, it's kind of a small screen, is then the net benefits on the x-axis, and the vertical axis is the probability of certain things happening. So the higher the bar, the more likely a certain outcome is to materialize. And you see part of this distribution is green, which is all the positive outcomes, and part of the distribution is red, which is all the negative ones. And the conspicuous thing here is the spike in the red area. And this is basically the situation where all the risks that are currently in the project actually lead to this project fail. Yeah? So there's all kinds of things that can go wrong when we try such a thing. And this stochastic simulation includes all of these risks and includes all the cases where things don't work out. So this is not wishful thinking by the project developer. This is at least aims to be more objective and include the potential shocks that can arise. We can also get an idea of the key uncertainties in this business model here, and it's things like the number and value of surviving infants, which is of course an incredibly difficult one to put a number on, but it's actually something that a decision maker has to consider when such a project is planned. We have the value of disease treatments. We have the extent to which bad project design reduces the performance of the system. And also a big one is the risk of political interference, which is substantial in this case. So in total, with the current state of knowledge, this is an incredibly risky project when we consider the potential shocks. So we need to collect more data, more information. There's a high chance of failure, and the key uncertainties relate to limited stakeholder inclusion and investor priorities. How important is it to save lives, basically? Second example is better borehole management to protect livestock from drought. I think I have to hurry up a little bit. So in Kenya, droughts normally lead to very high livestock mortality, and better managed boreholes could alleviate the problem. So we built a model based on the literature and expert knowledge that looks approximately like this. I'm going to go directly to the conclusions here. We have a fairly safe bet here. You see most of this distribution is green, so this is a pretty safe one to do. Low chance of losses. And key uncertainties here could be reduced to socioeconomic and market surveys. So there are certain things we don't need to know, but it's actually very important, for example, how much say, a liter of milk is worth to those herders. Last project here is on rain-fed agriculture interventions in the Tana River Basin. This looks at a fairly large-scale intervention. It's was really a portfolio of large-scale interventions related to improved soil management, water resource management, intensification of trees, as well as mixed livestock and grazing. And here we built a model based on extensive stakeholder consultations and several expert workshops. Here's the results. You see, again, a mixture of green and red here, meaning it can go wrong, it can also work out. And the numbers here, for those who can't read them, go up to $50 billion US, because this is a large-scale intervention. So there's a lot at stake here, and even this small red area could lead to substantial losses for people. Key uncertainties here are things like the cost of CO2, the profits that people can actually make from the land, and things of that nature. Overall, there's substantial gains and losses possible here. There are high information values, so it would be justified to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into studies here. That's economically justified to do that. And these should mainly be on farming profitability and also migration. You know, to what extent will people actually abandon the land if the sources of their livelihoods is gone? Some lessons learned finally. The high-level models for building without going into high mechanistic detail can often provide sufficient information to guide decision-making for specific decisions. And comprehensiveness here is more important than high mechanistic detail. Yeah? So detailed crop models in one part of the model and then huge uncertainties in another part of the model are actually not what we need. We actually need the same. We need to include everything here rather than focusing on only a few selected aspects. And long-term stochastic model runs. So model runs that include the probability of shocks and stresses and the potential damage, allow direct simulation of outcomes. So almost we can directly simulate the thing that we're calling resilience here. That's incredibly difficult to grasp if we just focus on the present. And the high-value variables are often not the ones that are typically measured, partly because we don't typically measure them. We know very little about them. And finally, engagement with decision makers directly increases the likelihood that results will actually be used. At the same time, for decision makers, engagement with the scientists directly, getting them to work on exactly what the problem is, also enhances the chance of getting useful information from them. That's all. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.